Hello and most welcome to 713. And we're having a lovely day today, actually sunshine here, it's not too bad. We had some sunshine yesterday as well, and it goes very nice with the snowy weather. It is very enticing. I will continue with the pragmatists, Mr. Peirce, Dewey and James, and what they found to be very ridiculous even was the idea of mind in a bucket idea, or that the mind is a bucket, a sort of storage for representations or quick photos in the central perspective of the world. This is a thing very often assumed, and yes, it does have a clear foundation in common sense and in ordinary language, without a doubt, but to accept it so, it's resulting in numerous paradoxes. We mentioned a lot of them. Event are the homunculus, the little figure inside of the head who is watching the representations. But there's another thing that the pragmatist reacted to, also stemming partly from Cartesius himself, but having a long strain of philosophers proposing that. And that's the critique that the pragmatists poses to exaggerated certainty of the philosophers. They're just way too certain. No statement, they say, or judgment about the world is absolutely certain or incorrigible. All beliefs and theories are better treated as working hypotheses, which may be needed to be modified, refined, revised, or rejected in light of future inquiry and experience. Pragmatists have defended such fallibilism by means of various arguments. Well, let me give you some sketches. There's 4 or 5. Number 1, there is an argument from the history of inquiry, even our best, most impressive theories, for instance Euclidean geometry, Newtonian physics, have needed significant and unexpected revisions. And that's the argument from history, from the history of inquiry even. And the second is, and I'd say that's even more important, scientific theories are always dramatically underdetermined by data. And then there are definitely alternative theories that fit said data. How can we absolutely and without a doubt be sure that we have chosen the right theory? And I think one very good example is classical physics. Julian Barber's theory fits the data exactly as classical physics. Same data, two different theories. And they are incredibly different at that. And number 3 is one from Peirce, C.S. Peirce, who says that truth is what would be accepted at the end of inquiry. It seems that we cannot be absolutely certain that an opinion of ours is true unless we know with certainty that we have reached the end of inquiry. And that is actually the Turing test as well. Much preceded. But how could we ever know that? Oh, be hard. 4. There is also a methodological argument as well. Ascriptions of certainty block the road of inquiry, and I think that is very important, because they may keep us from making progress. That is, finding a better view or theory. In that case, some progress is still possible. And the 5th and final one, there is a political argument as well. Fallibilism, it is said, is the only sane alternative to cocksure dogmatism. And to fanaticism, intolerance and violence to which such dogmatism can all too easily lead. And a third thing that pragmatists did that is rather unique for them, and that they inveighed against the Cartesian idea that philosophy should begin with a bold global doubt. That is, a doubt capable of demolishing all our old beliefs. Peirce, James, Dewey, and the later Quine, Popper, Rorty, for example, have all emphatically denied that we must wipe the slate clean and find some neutral, necessary, or presumptionless starting point for inquiry. Inquiry, pragmatists are persuaded, can start only when there are some actual or living doubt. But, they point out, we cannot genuinely doubt everything at once. Though they allow, as good fallibilists should, that there is nothing that we may not come to doubt in the course of our inquiries. And this is an anti-Cartesian attitude, and very well summed up by Otto Neurath's celebrated metaphor of the conceptual scheme as a raft. Inquirers are mariners who must repair their raft plank by plank, adrift all the while on the open sea, for they can never disembark or scrutinize the craft in dry dock from an external standpoint. In sum, we must begin in media res, in the middle of things, and confess that our starting points are contingent and historically conditioned inheritances. One meta-philosophical moral drawn by Dewey and second by Quine was that we should embrace naturalism. The idea that philosophy is not prior to science, but continues with it. There is thus no special distinctive method on which philosophers as a caste can pride themselves. No transcendentalist faculty of pure reason or intuition. No reality, immutable or otherwise, inaccessible to science for philosophy to keen or limb. Moreover, philosophers do not invent or legislate standards from on high. Instead, they make explicit the norms and methods implicit in our best current practice. Doesn't sound half bad. And finally, it should be noted that pragmatists are unafraid of the Cartesian global skeptic. That is, the kind of skeptic who contends that we cannot know anything about the external world, because we can never know that we are not merely dreaming. They have urged that such skepticism is merely a reductio ad absurdum of the futile quest for certainty. That skepticism rests on untenable Cartesian philosophy of mind, and that skepticism proposes a discredited correspondence theory of truth, and that the belief in the external world is justified insofar as it works, or best explains our sensory experience. That the problem of the external world is bogus, since it cannot be formulated unless it's already assumed that there is an external world. That the thought that there are truths no one could even know is empty. Yeah, very good. And that massive error about the world is simply inconceivable. And the last one comes from Davidson. One cannot help but like them. And now I come to the Kantian inheritance. Pragmatist critique of Cartesianism and empiricism draws heavily, though not uncritically, on Kant. Pragmatists typically think, for instance, that Kant was right to say that the world must be interpreted with the aid of a scheme of basic categories. But, they add, he was dead wrong to suggest that this framework is somehow sacrosanct, immutable, or necessary. Interesting difference. Our categories and theories are indeed our creations. They reflect our peculiar constitution and history and are not simply read off from the world. But frameworks can change and be replaced. And just as there is more than one way to skin a cat, there is more than one sound way to conceptualize the world and its content. Which interpretive framework or vocabulary we should use, that of physics, say, or common sense, will depend on our purposes and interest in a given context. The upshot of all this is that the world does not impose some unique description on us. Rather, it is we who choose how the world is to be described. Though this idea is powerfully present in James, it's also prominent in later pragmatism. It informs Carnap's distinction between internal and external questions. Goodman's talk of world-making and of right but incompatible world versions, and Putnam's insistence that objects exist relative to conceptual schemes or frameworks. Then there is the matter of appealing to raw experience as source of evidence for our beliefs. According to the traditional mainstream empiricism from Locke to Heidegger, our beliefs about the world ultimately derive from the justification from perception. What then justifies one's belief that a cat is on the mat? Not another belief or judgment, but simply one's visual experience. One sees said cat cavorting on said mat, and that's it. Since experience is simply given to the mind from without, it can justify one's basic beliefs. That is, beliefs are justified by those but whose justification does not derive from any other beliefs. Sanders, Rorty, Davidson, Putnam and Goodman are perhaps the best known pragmatist opponents of this foundationalist picture, drawing inspiration from Kant's dictum that intuitions without concepts are blind. They aver that to perceive is really to interpret and hence to classify. But if observation is theory-laden, if that is, epistemic access to reality is necessarily mediated by concepts and descriptions, then we cannot verify theories or worldviews by comparing them with some raw, unsullied senses given. Hence, all-time empiricists were fundamentally mistaken. Experience cannot serve as a basic belief-independent source of justification. And even more generally, pragmatists from Peirce to Rorty have been suspicious of foundationalist theories of justification, according to which empirical knowledge ultimately rests on an epistemically privileged basis. That is, on a class of foundational beliefs which justify or support all other beliefs, but which depend on no other beliefs for the justification. Their objection to such theories are many. That so-called immediate or non-inferential knowledge is a confused fiction. Indeed it is, I'd say. And that knowledge is more like a coherent web than a hierarchically structured building, and that there are no certain foundations for knowledge, since fallibilism is true. That foundational beliefs cannot be justified by appealing to perceptual experience, since the given is a myth, here, and that knowledge has no overall or non-contextual structure whatsoever. And the fourth, they also go against something called the spectator theory of knowledge. Pragmatists resemble Kant in yet another respect. They too ferociously repudiate the Lockean idea that the mind resembles either a blank slate on which nature impresses itself, or a dark chamber into which the light of experience streams. What these august metaphors seem to intend to convey, among other things, is the idea that observation is pure reception, and that the mind is fundamentally passive in perception. From the pragmatist standpoint, this is just one more lamentable incarnation of what Dewey dubbed the spectator theory of knowledge. According to spectator theorists who range from Plato to modern empiricists, knowing is akin to seeing or beholding. Here, in other words, the knower is envisioned as a peculiar kind of voyeur. Her aim is to reflect or duplicate the world without altering it, to survey or to contemplate things from a practically disengaged and disinterested standpoint. Does it ring a bell? Well, it sure does. Not so, says Dewey. For Dewey, Peirce, and like-minded pragmatists, knowledge or warranted assertion is the product of inquiry, a problem-solving process by means of which we move from doubt to belief. Inquiry, however, cannot proceed effectively unless we experiment. That is, manipulate or change reality in certain ways. Since knowledge thus grows through our attempts to push the world around and see what happens as a result. It follows that knowers as such must be agents. Agents, yes. As a result, the ancient dualism between theory and practice must go by the board. This insight is central to the experimental theory of knowledge, which is Dewey's alternative to the discredited spectorial conception. This repudiation of the passivity of observation is a major theme in pragmatist epistemology, According to James and Dewey, for instance, to observe is to select, to be on the lookout for something, be it for a needle in the haystack or a friendly face in the crowd. Hence, our perceptions and observations do not reflect nature with passive impartiality. First, because observers are bound to discriminate, guided by interest, expectation, and theory. Second, because we cannot observe unless we act. But if experience is inconceivably apart from human interests and agency, then perceivers are truly explorers of the world, not mirrors superfluously reproducing it. And if acceptance of some theory or other always precedes and directs observation, we must break with the classical empiricist's assumption that theories are derived from independently discovered data or facts. Again, it's proverbial that facts are stubborn things. If we want to find out how things really are, we are counseled by somber common sense to open our eyes, literally as well as figuratively, and take a gander at the world. Facts accessible to observation will then impress themselves on us, forcing their way into our minds, whether we are prepared to extend them at a hearty welcome or not. Facts so understood are the antidote to prejudice and the cure for bias. Their epistemic authority is so powerful that it cannot be overridden or resisted. This idea is a potent and reassuring one, but it's apt to mislead. According to holists such as James and Schiller, the justificatory status of beliefs is partly a function of how well they cohere or fit with entrenched beliefs or theory. Since the range of facts that we can countenance or acknowledge is accordingly constrained by our body of previous acquired beliefs, no fact can be admitted into our minds unless it can be coherently assimilated or harmonized with beliefs we already hold. This amounts to a rejection of Locke's suggestion that the mind is a blank slate, that is, a purely receptive and patient tabula rasa. And now we come to the fifth, and that's beyond correspondence theory of truth. According to a long-standing tradition running from Plato to the present day, truth is a matter of correspondence or agreement with reality, or with the aforementioned facts. But this venerable view is vague and beset with problems, say pragmatists. Here are just four. The first one, how is this mysterious relation called correspondence to be understood or explicated. Not as copying, surely, but then how? 2. The correspondence theory makes a mystery of our practices of verification and inquiry. For we cannot know whether our beliefs are correspondence truth. If the given is a myth, we cannot justify theories by comparing them with an unconceptualized reality. Three, it has seemed to some that traditional correspondence theories are committed to the outmoded Cartesian picture of the mind as nature's mirror, in which subjective inner representation of an objective outer order are formed. Four, it has also been urged that there is no extra linguistic reality for us to represent, no mind-independent world to which our beliefs are answerable. Yes, indeed. What sense then can be made of the suggestion that true thoughts correspond to the thought independent things? Well, it's rather a punishing blow to the analytic philosophy and the logic positivists. Well deserved, I say. Some pragmatists have concluded that the correspondence theory is positively mistaken and must be abandoned. Others, more cautious, merely insist that standard formulations of the theory are uninformative or incomplete. Scheele, Rorty and Putnam all arguably belong to the former group, whereas Peirce, James, Dewey, Reicher and Davidson to the latter. Apart from criticizing the correspondence theory, what have pragmatists had to say about truth? Here 3 views must be mentioned. First, James and Dewey are often said to have held the view that the truth is what works. True hypotheses are useful and vice versa. This view is easy to caricature and traduce until the reader attends carefully to the subtle pragmatist construal of utility. 2. According to Peirce, true opinions are those which inquirers will accept at the end of inquiry. That is, views on which we could not improve, no matter how far inquiry on that subject is pressed or pushed. Peirce's basic approach has inspired later pragmatists such as Putnam, whose internal realism glosses truth as ideal rational acceptability, as well as Appel and Habermas, who have equated truth with what would be accepted by all in ideal speech situation. 3. According to Rorty, truth has no nature or essence. Hence, the less said about it, the better. To call a belief or theory true is not to ascribe any property to it. It's merely to perform some speech act, for example, to recommend or to caution, etc. As Rorty sees it, his fellow pragmatists James, Dewey, Peirce, Putnam, Habermas, Appel all err in thinking that truth can be elucidated or explicated. Well, that makes me very interested in Richard Rorty. Maybe that should be the next project for the next coming week. I think I better round out here and I say thank you very much and have a pleasant afternoon. Bye bye.